The federal government deliberately targeted Black Lives Matter protesters via heavy-handed criminal prosecutions in an attempt to disrupt and discourage the global movement that swept the nation last summer in the wake of the Minneapolis police killing of George Floyd, according to a new report released Wednesday by the Movement for Black Lives. Movement leaders and experts said the prosecution of protesters over the past year continues a century-long practice by the federal government, rooted in structural racism, to suppress black social movements via the use of surveillance tactics and other mechanisms. The empirical data and findings in this report largely corroborate what black organizers have long known intellectually, intuitively, and from lived experience about the federal government's disparate policing and prosecution of racial justice protests and related activity, the report stated. The report, which was first shared with the Associated Press, argues that as the uprisings in the summer of 2020 increased, so did police presence, the deployment of federal agents and prosecution of protesters. Titled, "Struggle for Power: The Ongoing Persecution of Black Movement by the U.S. Government," the report details how policing has been used historically as a major tool to deter black people from engaging in their right to protest and weaken efforts to draw attention to issues impacting Black Americans. It also drew a comparison to how the government used Counterintelligence Program techniques to disrupt the work of the Black Panther Party and other organizations fighting for black liberation. We want to really show how the U.S. government has continued to persecute the black movement by surveillance, by criminalizing protests, and by using the criminal legal system to prevent people from protesting and punishing them for being engaged in protests by attempting to curtail their First Amendment rights, said Amara Enyia, the Movement for Black Lives Policy Research Coordinator. It is undeniable that racism plays a role, Enyia said. It is structurally built into the fabric of this country and its institutions, which is why it's been so difficult to eradicate. It's based on institutions that were designed around racism and around the devaluing of black people and the devaluing of black lives. In the report, published in partnership with the Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility Clinic at City University of New York School of Law, the Movement for Black Lives is calling for amnesty for all protesters involved in the nationwide protests. The group, also known as M4BL, is demanding reparations from the government that includes an acknowledgment and an apology for the long history of targeting movements in support of black life and black liberation.